Welcome back. If you're new, welcome. So this is episode 3 of the R32 all-wheel drive swap GTI conversion, whatever you want to call it. If you are new, I'll link it above. I'm pulling together a playlist of all the videos that are going to be a part of this series so that anybody who's looking to do this themselves can look up the information and hopefully find something of use in there. So today I got the GTI here at the shop, and I'm going to be basically putting this on the lift and comparing it with the R32's rear floor to see what the differences are and determine how far I have to cut to get everything that we need out of the R32 so that we could do the swap properly. So we want it to start. To find out what's really the difference between the two cars. Like where do the mounting points differ? Do the floors actually line up the same? You know, is there anything that's going to be a surprise? All right, so a little bit of updating to do. Not as much kind of in progress video this time, just because I really wanted to get as much as I could done because I kind of limited on time today because I have some stuff to do with the family. But what we got done is the complete rear subframe, differential, and suspension is out of the car. And it does seem like quite the monstrosity when it's over here on this transmission jack, but it's actually not that bad. It's really, I don't know if you guys can see, 4 bolts holding this to the chassis, and then you got your 4 holding the front of your trailing arms on either side, and that's really all that holds all of this in the car. I mean, besides the strut. The strut's connected, but it's actually a relatively simple removal process. It seems very daunting when you look at it, but once you get underneath it, it's not bad. All of this here is going to be disassembled, and the subframe, cradle, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be sent out to be powder coated. The trailing arm is going to be powder coated. Everything that's going to be reused is going to get powder coated. These I'm likely going to replace with something adjustable. Grooving Parts, I think, makes them. They make pretty good stuff, so I'll probably be going with them. And then in terms of mounts to the body, these I'm going to go solid, so I don't have to ever worry about them. And then I'll either go poly on the bushings and the suspension, or spherical bearings if possible, where possible. Just because this isn't going to be a daily driver, it's going to be a weekend warrior, track car, whatever you want to call it, have fun with car. So I don't really have to worry about the NVH all that much, but I'd rather have that connection to the road. So that's really it in terms of the rear subframe, differential, assembly, suspension, what have you. Then the gas tank's out, so this is something we're also going to need to use in the GTI. And the reason being that this gas tank is actually shaped completely differently from the one in that car. So I guess that was a good time to show you that car, so you can get a good view of this gas tank here. So this here sits in front of the differential assembly, and then this kind of comes above. This area here sits kind of like, what about here somewhere? It's like above. It's a very funky setup. But you can see that the GTI is totally different. So GTI's gas tank is right here. You can see it's more like amoeba shaped, and the exhaust actually comes around the gas tank in this car and over the beam. And this is actually a bigger exhaust than it came with from the factory, obviously 3-inch for the turbo. So this is gonna all have to change. These heat shields are totally different. So that's something that's gonna have to be refreshed. You know, put a nice new pump in it, whether it's just a standard factory pump with a surge tank, or I can figure out how to make some quality high flowers run in the factory basket. I've been seeing a lot of good stuff being done in like the RS3 TTRS world with like brushless pumps and things like that. So I don't know if that's ever going to be available in the Mark IV world, or if it already is. If you know, leave a comment. That way I can go digging. What else? What else? So yeah, this is actually all the EVAP stuff, which is totally different from the GTI as well. So this sits inside of the spare tire well up here. And this stuff all reaches up into the wheel well and sits up here in this area here, all mounted to the side. So the GTI has something similar here, where everything's mounted over here, but it does not have anything inside the spare tire well. And keep in mind, that car has a full-size spare. This car has a space saver spare. So this shape of this donut recess is completely different in this car than that car. So again, that's another reason why you need the floor from this car if you want to do all-wheel drive in that car, to make sure that fits underneath. And not just fits, but the mounting points. So we'll get into that in a sec. So the suspension, trailing arms mount over here on this car and over here. And if I bring you over to the GTI, you'll see that this is a solid rear beam over here. And it mounts completely different. So this beam actually has this like piece of sheet metal that's bent over here, and the beam bolts to it. And this is bolted to the car. And while this is also 4 bolts to hold it to the car, I believe 4 bolts, yeah, it does not have the cup, which this has, for the actual pivot of the trailing arm, which you can see over here. So that's really where the main details are that you need for the car. So there's that, there's the strut mount. So the strut on the R32 mounts towards the rear of the car. It actually comes on an angle towards the rear, while on the GTI, it's straight up. It actually mounts into, I don't know if you can see that, it mounts up into the body towards the inside of the car, while the R32 has to go back that way. So all of this floor has to be changed. Let me go into some of the areas that we're gonna have to take with us in order to make this work. So you can see here, did a little bit of discovery work to find where some of the seams are. So you see, took some of the undercoating off here, and there's a seam here that runs actually bent in towards the inside of the car. And I'll show a picture here of what I'm talking about in a little bit more detail from a photo I found on the internet. And then that seam comes up to the inside of the body. And then you can see here where the seam sealer is. This runs all the way over the wheel well, down the front side here, and then it runs along this pinch weld. So this pinch weld, yes, it's a little bit mangled, but it seems like this is all just surface, and it's a little bit twisted, but we can bend it back and clean it up, and it should be okay to weld. We'll find out more obviously when we get it out of the car and start really getting this undercoating off, whether we can sandblast it off or have to burn it off, I don't know yet. And then this seam basically comes this way. It cuts across the bottom of the car, and then it goes upwards this way. And then from here, it transitions to the right and comes across the car, and you'll see here is where it continues. And this is basically the rear seat. You can see here is where the fuel pumps are. And this comes across and it basically just repeats on that side all the same. And you'll see that, that's pretty far forward in the car, so that, you can get the suspension mounts coming backwards, the coil mount, the rear strut mounts, and everything having to do with the rear floor in terms of like where the subframe mounts. So you got one here, one here, one here, and one here. Those don't exist on the GTI. So let me take you back over there really quick so you can get an idea of what the GTI looks like underneath. So you see this is the spare tire well. It comes down way lower. There's really no way to get an idea of the positioning or the height, but you can definitely tell it doesn't have that recess in the donut. It's also completely different over here where the strut has to mount on the R32. So it's quite a bit of work. And then it's not really visible. Oh, maybe it is. So you can see up there where that bolt is. You can see some seam sealer running horizontally. And that's that same seam at the top of the rear seat where you have to cut out the floor, or essentially just drill out the spot welds of the floor and pull all of that out. And then here's that same seam with the U that cuts across the car. I'll go back to the R32. This right here. So that's where these floors would match up and be the same between the two of them. So in theory, the front of the car should be very similar for both cars. Now there are some differences that we found so far. So these 4 studs do not exist on the GTI, and these are for the purpose of holding on these heat shields. And then if you come forward, these 2 exist, so these are exactly the same, but these don't. And these again are for the purpose of holding on, I believe, the front part of the heat shield, but we'll have to find more detail about that. And then the other thing, these right here, you can see they're spot welded to the tunnel. These 2 little brackets hold the carrier bearing for the center drive shaft. So that's something that we're gonna have to take out of this car and put in the GTI. Figure out where it's gonna sit. More than likely take a bunch of measurements, and that'll help us lock it in, or mock up the drive shaft in the car once the rear's in, see where it falls and put it where it wants to be naturally. I don't know. What else? So these may not matter. The way the R32 actually works in terms of heat shields is that the drive shaft actually, so let's say the heat shield sits like right around here. The drive shaft is up here where this light is, kind of like that. It's above the heat shield. So the exhaust then runs underneath that heat shield, actually closer to the ground than the GTI. So the GTI, because it has no drive shaft, the exhaust can sit pretty far up in the tunnel and out of the way. And the R32, you don't have that luxury because you have to make room for the drive shaft. So the exhaust actually sits a bit lower. So those are all things that we'll have to take into account. Once the rear floor is in and start reassembly, figure out, whether we're gonna run these or not, or keep them out and just heat wrap the exhaust to keep the heat at bay, because the gas tank actually has its own heat shields attached to itself. So as long as that's protected, I'm not too, I don't really care about the drive shaft getting a little bit hot, especially, back here where it's not really gonna be all that hot anymore, unless I'm doing something like 200-mile pull. So yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell. It's a very quick update, and sorry that I don't have more to share in terms of video process, but I'll have more. If you're interested in watching this series, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.